Lord Charles Edward Montgomery, standing at the door of the room, observed the untouched porcelain plate on the silver tray. 15 days. 15 days since the boy had last brought a spoonful to his mouth. The doctors said it was a matter of time, that the child would simply cease to be there, and all the most powerful man in the region could do was clench his fists, powerless to compel his own son to live. Before we delve into this story, leave your comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're joining us from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. Blackwood Manor dominated the hilltop like a sentinel of stone and history. Erected in the late 19th century in the picturesque rolling hills of the Cotswolds, the estate had witnessed 3 generations of powerful landowners, and now it breathed the heavy silence of mourning. Every corridor seemed wider, every room emptier since Helen Montgomery had closed her eyes for the last time, 6 months prior. Charles Edward was not a man of outward displays. At 42, he carried on his shoulders the weight of his title, his lands, the responsibilities that came from birth. Thin, tall, with strands of grey beginning to mark his temples, he maintained an erect posture even when pain doubled him over inside. His wife had departed suddenly, a fever no doctor could control, and had taken with her the only thing that still made that house feel like a home. His son, Peter Henry, was only 7 when his mother died. He was a small boy with almond-shaped eyes and straight hair that fell over his forehead. In the first days after the funeral, he cried softly during the night. Then he stopped crying. He stopped talking. He stopped smiling. And for the past 15 days, he had simply stopped eating. Initially, the Lord was not alarmed. Children throw tantrums, he thought. It will pass. But the meals came back untouched, one after another. The boy's body began to waste away, his skin growing pale, his bones marking more prominently each day. That's when despair came knocking. Dr. Arthur Finch, the family doctor for decades, climbed the marble staircase for the 3rd time that week. He was a man of nearly 70, with round spectacles and a grey moustache, who had attended the Montgomerys since Charles Edward was a child. "Lord, I've tried everything," he said, adjusting his glasses as they descended together to the main hall. "Syrups, tonics. I even suggested a change of scenery, taking the boy out for some sun in the garden. He doesn't respond." Charles Edward paced back and forth, his hands clasped behind his back. "It can't just be the loss of his mother. Other children go through this and don't stop eating." "It's different when a child is overly sensitive," the doctor replied carefully. "Peter Henry is trapped in grief. He can't get out, and the longer time passes, the weaker his body becomes." The Lord stopped before the window that overlooked the formal gardens. Outside, the rose beds were perfectly trimmed, the central fountain jetted clear water, and everything seemed to follow order as it always had. But inside that house, everything was falling apart. "And what do you suggest?" The doctor hesitated. "Lord, it's no longer a medical matter, it's something of the heart. The boy needs someone to make him want to live again." That night, it was Mrs. Beatrice who sought out her son. The family matriarch was 73, with white hair pulled back in an impeccable bun and a gaze that still commanded respect. A widow for 10 years, she lived in the east wing of the manor and followed everything closely, even when she pretended to be oblivious. "Charles Edward, come with me to the library," she said firmly, without waiting for a reply. He followed her. The library was one of the oldest rooms in the house, with mahogany shelves filled with leather-bound volumes. Mrs. Beatrice closed the door and pointed to an armchair. "Sit." He obeyed, albeit reluctantly. He wasn't accustomed to receiving orders, not even from his own mother. "Mother, if you've come to tell me I'm failing as a father, I already know. I haven't come to tell you anything. I've come to fix it," she cut in, sitting opposite him. "Peter Henry will die if we continue like this, and you know it." The word fell like a stone. Charles Edward averted his gaze. "Dr. Finch has tried everything. Medicine doesn't cure everything, my son. Sometimes the cure comes from where you least expect it." He frowned. "What are you talking about?" Mrs. Beatrice took a deep breath. "I met a young woman in the village, simple but capable. She works as a cook in houses around the area. They say she has a special touch, that she can calm even the most difficult children. I want to bring her here." Charles Edward stood up, incredulous. "You want to hire a village cook to save my son? We have an entire kitchen, with 3 staff members. And none of them managed to make Peter Henry eat a single spoonful," she retorted, unperturbed. "I'm not asking for permission, Charles. I'm informing you. She starts working here tomorrow." He was about to protest, but his mother stood up and walked to the door. "If you're too proud to accept help, so be it. But don't let that pride kill your son." The door closed, and the Lord was left alone among the books, feeling the weight of the words. The next day, at dawn, a 26-year-old woman walked up the road leading to Blackwood Manor. Her name was Clara Thompson. She carried a cloth bag with simple clothes, her brown hair tied in a ponytail, and a gaze that mixed determination and apprehension. Clara knew the Montgomery family's reputation. Everyone in the village knew they were owners of land, of power, of history. But what she didn't expect was to be called to work precisely there, in the heart of a world so distant from her own. Mrs. Beatrice was waiting for her at the back of the house, away from the eyes of the other servants. "Are you Clara Thompson?" the matriarch asked, assessing the young woman from head to toe. "Yes, madam. I called you because I need someone who knows how to deal with children. My grandson hasn't eaten in 15 days. He's dying. The doctors have given up. Do you think you can help?" Clara swallowed hard. She didn't expect such directness right away. "I can try, madam, but I don't promise miracles. I don't want a miracle. I want my grandson to eat," Mrs. Beatrice said, pointing to the kitchen door. "Come, I'll show you where you'll work." The manor kitchen was enormous, with a wood-burning stove, marble countertops, and a pantry that seemed endless. Clara had never seen such abundance in one place. "You can use whatever you wish," the matriarch instructed, "but one thing, the Lord cannot know you are here. At least not yet. He has his own prejudices." Clara nodded, not entirely understanding, but willing to obey. She was led to a small, simple but clean room in the back, where she left her belongings. When she was alone in the kitchen, Clara began to work. She knew there was no point in preparing elaborate dishes. A child doesn't want sophistication. A child wants affection, the smell of home, something that reminds them of security. So she started with the basics. Chicken soup. She took a whole chicken, cleaned it, cut it, and placed it in a large pot with fresh water. She added rice, just the right amount of salt, a clove of garlic, bay leaves. She let it simmer slowly, patiently, until the broth gained color and the aroma began to fill the entire kitchen. When it was ready, Clara placed a portion in a simple white porcelain bowl and went upstairs, guided by Mrs. Beatrice. Peter Henry's room was on the 2nd floor, at the end of a corridor lined with French wallpaper and lit by crystal chandeliers. Mrs. Beatrice opened the door slowly, and Clara entered the boy's world for the first time. It was a spacious room, with noble wooden furniture, heavy curtains at the windows, and a 4-poster bed in the center. But what most caught Clara's attention was the boy. He was lying down, facing the wall, so small and fragile that he seemed to disappear between the white sheets. "Peter, I've brought someone to keep you company," Mrs. Beatrice said, her voice softer than Clara had ever heard it. The boy did not turn. Clara approached slowly. Placing the bowl on a small table beside the bed, she sat on the edge, without haste. "Hi, Peter. My name is Clara. I've brought something I made especially for you." Silence. She didn't insist. She just stayed there, waiting, until the boy turned his head slightly. His eyes were deep-set, tired, as if he had already given up on everything. "It smells good, doesn't it?" Clara said, picking up the bowl and bringing it closer. "It's chicken soup. My grandmother always said chicken soup cures everything, even a broken heart." Peter stared at her, and for a second Clara thought he was going to say something. But he just turned his face back to the wall. Clara was not deterred. She picked up the spoon, filled it with a little broth, and blew on it to cool it. "Just one little spoonful. I promise I'll leave you alone afterward." She waited and waited, until, almost disbelieving, she saw the boy open his mouth. Just a little, but enough. Clara brought the spoon to him, slowly, and Peter swallowed. It was as if the whole world held its breath at that moment. "There," Clara said, smiling. "It didn't hurt at all, did it?" She offered another spoonful, then one more, and one more, until half the bowl was empty. When Peter finally closed his mouth, refusing more, Clara didn't force it. She just gently ran her hand through his hair. "Tomorrow, we'll try again, okay?" He didn't answer, but he also didn't avert his gaze, and that, for Clara, was already a beginning. As Clara descended the stairs, carrying the half-empty bowl, Mrs. Beatrice waited for her in the corridor with a contained smile. "He ate?" "Yes, he ate. Not much, but he ate." The matriarch closed her eyes for an instant, as if thanking in silence. "You will continue to come every day, same time, same routine, until he gets better." Clara nodded, but before she could reply, they heard firm footsteps coming from downstairs. It was the Lord. "Hide," Mrs. Beatrice ordered, pushing Clara into one of the guest rooms. Clara obeyed, leaning against the door and holding her breath. From outside, she heard the Lord's grave voice. "Mother, what are you doing up here?" "I came to see your son, of course. Someone needs to." "I see my son every day. Seeing is not the same as being present, Charles Edward." There was a pause. Clara imagined the scene. The Lord, tense, his mother firm, neither of them backing down. "Did he eat anything today?" the Lord asked, his voice softer. "He did." The silence that followed was charged with incredulity. "What do you mean he ate?" "Simple. Someone had the patience to make the boy eat, something you didn't have." Clara heard the Lord's footsteps moving away, quick, climbing the stairs to his son's room. Mrs. Beatrice waited until he was out of sight, then opened the guest room door. "You can go. Come back tomorrow at the same time, and be careful not to cross paths with him." Clara went downstairs through the back, her heart still racing. She didn't quite know what she had gotten herself into, but one thing was certain: that boy needed her, and she wasn't going to give up. In Peter Henry's room, Charles Edward stood beside the bed, looking at his son. The boy slept, his face finally relaxed, and on the small table there was an empty bowl. Empty. The Lord picked up the bowl, ran his finger over the still damp bottom, and brought it to his mouth. Simple chicken soup, mild seasoning, nothing sophisticated. But there was something there he couldn't identify. Something that made sense. He looked at his sleeping son, and for the first time in months, he felt a flicker of hope. The routine began to form. Every day at the end of the morning, Clara would come in through the back entrance, always guided by Mrs. Beatrice or by Mary, the matriarch's trusted housekeeper. She would prepare the food in the kitchen, away from the curious eyes of the other staff, and personally take it to Peter Henry's room. On the second day, the boy ate a little more. On the third, he was waiting for her, awake. On the fourth, he managed something that almost looked like a smile. Clara wasn't a woman of many words, but she knew how to listen. While the boy ate, she told simple stories, things that happened in the village, animals she saw on the way, things that made Peter frown with curiosity. "This morning, do you know what I saw?" Clara said, sitting on the edge of the bed as he ate his soup. "A robin teaching its chick to fly. The little bird hopped from branch to branch, all clumsy, but it didn't give up. The mother stayed up there singing like, 'Come on, you can do it.'" Peter stopped chewing for an instant, his eyes fixed on her. "Did it do it?" he asked, his voice hoarse from so much silence. It was the first time he had spoken to Clara. "Yes, it did," she replied, smiling. "It fell twice, but on the third try, it flew perfectly, soaring through the air, free." The boy resumed eating, and Clara realized she had touched on something important. Peter Henry wasn't just a grieving child. He was a little bird who had forgotten how to fly. The following week, the boy was already sitting in bed when Clara arrived, waiting for the bowl and the stories. She began to vary the recipes: rice pudding, oatmeal porridge with cinnamon, warm cheese bread. Simple things, but made with care, and Peter ate everything. Mrs. Beatrice observed from afar, satisfied. Her grandson was coming back to life, gaining color in his face, recovering the sparkle in his eyes. But she knew she couldn't hide Clara forever. Eventually, the Lord would find out. And that's what happened. It was a Thursday afternoon. When Charles Edward returned early from a meeting in the city, he went straight to his son's room, unannounced, and opened the door. Inside, Clara was sitting on the edge of the bed holding a bowl, while Peter Henry laughed at something she had just told him. The Lord froze. "What is going on here?" Peter's laughter died instantly. Clara stood up, the bowl still in her hands, her heart pounding. "Lord, Who are you?" He cut in, his voice harsh. "What are you doing in my son's room?" "She's Clara, Father," Peter said softly. "She brings me food." Charles Edward looked at his son, then at Clara, then back at his son. His mind worked quickly, putting the pieces together. "My mother brought you here?" Clara nodded, unable to speak. "How long has this been going on?" "A week, sir." He took a deep breath, trying to control the rising anger. "Leave, now." "Father, no." Peter stood up in bed, his eyes wide. "She didn't do anything wrong." "Peter Henry, lie down. I'll handle this." "But Father—" "Lie down!" The boy obeyed, startled, and Clara left the room with her head bowed, the bowl still in her hands. In the corridor, she crossed paths with Mrs. Beatrice, who was coming up quickly, alerted by Mary. "He found out," Clara whispered. "I know. Go to the kitchen and wait there." Clara went downstairs, her legs trembling, and stood in the middle of the kitchen, unsure what to do. Upstairs, the Lord's shouts echoed through the corridors. "How dare you bring a stranger into this house without consulting me?" Charles Edward roared at his mother. "This stranger saved your son, you fool," Mrs. Beatrice retorted, undaunted. 15 days ago, Peter wasn't eating anything. Today he is alive, with color in his face, becoming a child again, and you want to send her away. I don't know who this woman is, where she came from, what she wants. She wants the same as any decent person, to work and to help. I don't understand your problem. My problem is that I have responsibility for this house, for my son, and I do not accept decisions made behind my back." Mrs. Beatrice took a step forward, looking her son in the eyes. "Then you make the decision now. Do you want your son to starve to death again? Or do you swallow your pride and accept that someone managed to do what you could not?" Charles Edward clenched his fists, his jaw tight. He wanted to shout. He wanted to throw everyone out. He wanted everything to go back to how it was before. But before, Helen was alive, Peter was laughing, the house was full of light, and none of that would return. He turned and entered his son's room. Peter was huddled in bed, hugging a pillow, his eyes red. "Peter," the Lord called, his voice softer. Don't send her away, Father, please. Charles Edward sat on the edge of the bed, something he hadn't done in months. Do you like her? The boy nodded, wiping his face. She reminds me of Mother, not because she's the same, but because she cares. The sentence hit the Lord like a punch. Peter was saying that he, his father, didn't care, and perhaps it was true. Perhaps he had distanced himself so much, locked himself so much in his own pain, that he had forgotten his son. All right, he said, running a hand through the boy's hair. She can stay. Peter lifted his face, his eyes shining. Really? Really? But on one condition, you have to promise me you'll keep eating, not just with her, but with me too. Agreed? Agreed, Father. Charles Edward hugged his son, and it was as if a wall inside him began to crack. Clara continued working at the manor, but now with the Lord's official permission. He set rules. She was to enter through the back, maintain discretion, prepare the boys' meals and nothing more. She was not to circulate through the house unnecessarily, nor to discuss family matters with other staff. Clara accepted everything without complaint. She wasn't there to cause problems. She was there for the boy. And Peter, little by little, returned to being a child. He began to eat at regular times, gained weight, recovered his energy. Clara wasn't limited to just the kitchen. When she had time, she would stay with him in his room, teaching simple games, telling stories, helping with the lessons his private tutor left. The Lord observed from afar, always from afar. He saw his son laugh again, run through the corridors, ask to go down to the garden. And each time this happened, he felt a mixture of relief and something he couldn't name. Gratitude, perhaps, or envy for not having been the one to achieve it. One day, Clara was in the kitchen preparing a cornmeal cake when she heard firm footsteps entering. She turned and came face to face with the Lord. "Lord," she said, wiping her hands on her apron, "do you need anything?" Charles Edward stopped near the counter, observing the ingredients. "Just came to see what you're making." "Cornmeal cake. Peter asked for it." He nodded, saying nothing, but didn't leave. He stood there, as if he wanted to say something, but didn't know how to begin. Clara returned to work, beating the eggs, adding the cornmeal, stirring the batter with precise movements. The Lord watched every gesture, mesmerized by its simplicity. "Where did you learn to cook?" he asked, breaking the silence. "From my grandmother. She used to say that food made in a hurry doesn't nourish anyone. It takes time. It takes care." "Is your grandmother still alive?" "No, sir, she died 3 years ago." "And your parents?" Clara hesitated, the spoon pausing in the middle of the bowl. "My father died when I was a child. My mother, she left. I don't know where she is." Charles Edward frowned. He hadn't expected that answer. "What do you mean she left?" "She did, sir. One day she simply walked out of the house and never came back. My grandmother raised me ever since." There was a contained pain in her voice, but Clara didn't let it show. She just went back to stirring the batter, as if she was used to carrying that burden alone. The Lord remained silent, not knowing what to say. Suddenly, this young woman wasn't just the cook. She was someone who also knew loss, someone who also knew what it was like to be alone. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "You don't need to be, sir. It was a long time ago." She poured the batter into a greased pan and put it in the oven. The smell of cake began to spread through the kitchen, sweet and comforting. "Would you like to try some when it's ready?" Clara asked without looking at him. Charles Edward almost said no, that he had things to do, that it wasn't his custom to stay in the kitchen eating cake. But something in that moment made him change his mind. "Yes, I would." Half an hour later, the two were sitting at the kitchen table, each with a piece of still warm cornmeal cake. Charles Edward took the first bite and closed his eyes. My mother used to make a cake like this, he said, almost to himself. When I was a child. Was it good? It was. But I think yours is better. Clara smiled, and for the first time the Lord noticed that her smile was sincere. It wasn't the forced smile that servants gave to please. It was real. They ate in silence, and when Charles Edward finished, he stood up. Thank you for the cake. Any time you wish, sir. He left the kitchen with a strange feeling in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time, something akin to peace. Weeks passed, and the manor's routine began to change. Peter Henry, who had barely left his room before, now ran through the gardens, played with the dogs, climbed trees. Clara was always nearby, supervising from a distance, making sure he ate properly, that he didn't get hurt. Mrs. Beatrice observed everything with satisfaction. The plan had worked better than she imagined. But there was something that bothered her, something she knew would eventually come to light. Clara's surname, Thompson. It was a common name, it was true, but in the context of that region, in the history of the Montgomery family, that name carried weight. And Mrs. Beatrice knew that eventually someone would make the connection. It was on a Saturday afternoon that it happened. The Lord was in the library, reviewing old estate documents, when he found a letter yellowed with time. It was from his father, written decades ago, detailing a conflict with a former foreman on the family lands. The foreman's name, John Thompson. Charles Edward read and reread the letter, his mind working. John Thompson had been responsible for a series of public humiliations against the Lord's grandfather, false accusations that almost brought the family to ruin. In the end, the truth came out. John was expelled from the lands, and the Montgomerys recovered their reputation. But the mark remained. The Lord stood up, the letter in his hand, and went to find his mother. He found Mrs. Beatrice on the veranda, sipping tea and observing the garden. "Mother, I need to speak with you." "Speak." He showed her the letter. "Thompson, John Thompson. Did you know?" Mrs. Beatrice sighed, placing her teacup back on its saucer. "I did. And yet you brought this young woman into my house?" "She has nothing to do with what her grandfather did, Charles Edward. Her grandfather humiliated us. He almost destroyed this family." "And she saved your son," the matriarch retorted, her voice firm. "Or does that no longer matter?" Charles Edward gripped the letter in his hands, anger rising like a wave. "You should have told me. If I had told you, you never would have let her in here, and Peter would be dead now." The sentence fell like a guillotine. The Lord was silent, trembling with contained fury. "I want her to leave." "No." "What do you mean, no?" "She's not leaving, Charles, not as long as your son needs her, and you know he does. I don't want the blood of John Thompson inside this house." "Then you'd better start getting over it, because she's already here, and she's done more for this family than any doctor, any servant, anyone you tried to hire. If you want to send her away because of a surname, go ahead, but you'll have to explain that to your son." Charles Edward stormed off the veranda, went up to Peter's room, and opened the door forcefully. The boy was sitting on the floor, putting together a puzzle. Beside him, Clara was organizing the pieces by color. "Clara, leave, now," the Lord ordered. She stood up, startled, and left without questioning. Peter stood, confused. "Father, what's wrong?" "Sit there," he said, pointing to the bed. The boy obeyed, his heart racing. He knew that tone of voice. It was the tone that came before something bad. "Peter, I need to tell you something about Clara." "What?" "Her grandfather did bad things to our family a long time ago." "Things that hurt your great-grandfather?" Peter frowned. "And what does that have to do with her?" "It has everything to do with it. She carries his blood, and I don't know if I can trust her." The boy was silent for an instant, processing. Then he looked at his father with a seriousness that didn't match his age. "Father, Clara didn't do anything bad. She just helped me. She made me eat when I didn't want to live anymore. If her grandfather did something wrong, that's his problem, not hers." Charles Edward hadn't expected that answer, not from a 7-year-old child. "But Peter, you always said we have to judge people by what they do, not by what others do. Or does that only count when it's convenient?" The sentence echoed in the room. The Lord was left without a response. Peter got off the bed and went to the door. "If you send her away, I'll stop eating again, and this time I won't come back." He left, leaving his father alone with his own thoughts. That night, Charles Edward couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying his son's words in his head. Peter's logic was simple, but devastating. How could he judge someone for another person's mistake? How could he condemn Clara for something she didn't even know had happened? But pride, that old pride that came from generations, refused to yield. The next day, Clara arrived at the manor as usual, but was intercepted by Mary before entering. "The Lord wants to speak with you, in the library." Clara felt her stomach churn. She knew that wasn't a good sign. She entered the library and found Charles Edward standing, his back to her, looking out the window. "Lord, Mrs. Mary said you wished to see me." He turned, his face unreadable. "Sit." Clara obeyed, her hands sweating. "Do you know who John Thompson was?" The question caught her by surprise. "Yes, I do. He was my grandfather." "And do you know what he did?" Clara lowered her eyes. "I do. My grandmother told me. He made false accusations against your family, caused trouble, was expelled from the lands. And you never thought it important to tell me this." I didn't know if it was important. It happened so long ago, and I am not him, sir. I have done nothing against you or your family." Charles Edward crossed his arms, still standing. "But you carry his blood." Clara raised her face, and for the first time since she arrived there was firmness in her gaze. "I do, yes. But I also carry the blood of my grandmother, who raised me with honesty, and I carry my own name, my own choices. If you are going to judge me by what my grandfather did, then there is nothing I can say to change your opinion. But I came here to help your son, and that is what I did. If that means nothing to you, then perhaps it is best if I leave." She stood up, ready to go, but the Lord spoke before she reached the door. "Wait." Clara stopped, without turning. "My son told me something yesterday. He said we should judge people by what they do, not by what others do. And he's right. I was wrong." She turned, surprised. "Sir?" Charles Edward sighed, running a hand over his face. "You saved my son, and I was so trapped in the past, so trapped in my grief, that I couldn't see it. I'm sorry." It was the first time Clara had seen the Lord apologize. And it wasn't an empty apology, it was sincere. "I accept your apology, sir. I want you to continue working here. Not just taking care of Peter, but being a part of this house, if you accept." Clara hesitated. Part of her wanted to leave, to escape that world that wasn't hers. But another part, the part that cared for Peter, for Mrs. Beatrice, and perhaps even for that proud man in front of her, wanted to stay. "I accept." The Lord nodded, and for the first time in days he seemed to relax. "Thank you, Clara." She left the library with a lighter heart, and when she crossed paths with Peter in the corridor, the boy ran and hugged her tightly. "He let you stay." "He did, yes. I knew he would. He's just stubborn sometimes, but deep down, he's good." Clara smiled, ruffling the boy's hair. "Come on, let's prepare your lunch." The two went down to the kitchen together, and life at the manor returned to normal, or to what was the new normal. Months passed, and Clara became an indispensable part of the household routine. She was no longer just the cook. She was the person Peter sought when he had nightmares. She was the one who helped with his lessons. She was the one who told him stories before bed. And the Lord, little by little, began to realize that her presence changed more than just his son. It changed the entire house. Meals regained their flavor. Laughter echoed through the corridors again. Even the staff seemed lighter, less tense. Charles Edward began to spend more time in the kitchen, always with excuses. He wanted to see if Peter had eaten. He wanted to grab some fruit. He wanted to check the week's menu. But the truth was otherwise. He liked being near Clara. He liked hearing the stories she told. He liked seeing her laugh. He liked the way she treated his son with such affection. And more than that, he liked how she treated him. Without exaggerated reverence, without fear, but with respect. One day he came down to the kitchen and found Clara preparing pumpkin preserve. The sweet scent filled the air. "May I try some?" he asked, approaching the stove. Clara took a clean spoon, filled it with a little of the preserve, and blew on it before offering. "Careful, it's still hot." He tasted it, and the flavor exploded in his mouth. Sweet, but not cloying, perfect. "My grandmother used to make this at Christmas," he said, almost nostalgically. "Mine too. It's a tradition, isn't it? Do you have family in the village?" "I have some cousins. We're not very close, but we see each other now and then." "And don't you think about marrying? Having your own family?" The question came out before he could properly think. Clara stopped stirring the preserve, surprised. "I've thought about it, but it never worked out. The men in the village think a cook isn't suitable for a wife, just a servant. They are fools, then." She looked at him, and something passed between them, something neither of them was prepared to admit. "Lord, Call me Charles. When we're alone, you can call me Charles." Clara swallowed hard. "I don't know if that's appropriate. Nothing in this house has been appropriate since you arrived, and yet it's the best thing that's happened in months." They stood in silence, looking at each other, until Clara returned to stirring the preserve, breaking the moment. "I'll take some to Peter when it cools." "All right." Charles Edward left the kitchen, but returned several times that afternoon, and in the following afternoons. And all week, Mrs. Beatrice observed from afar, a discreet smile on her lips. She knew what was happening even before the two of them realized it. It was on a rainy night that everything changed. Peter had had a nightmare and woken up crying. Clara, who now slept in a room near his to be able to help when needed, went to calm him. "Shh, it's all right. It was just a bad dream." "I dreamed you were leaving," the boy sobbed, "and I'd be alone again. I'm not leaving, Peter. I'm here. Promise? I promise." She stayed with him until he fell asleep, softly humming a lullaby her grandmother used to sing to her when she was a child. When she left the room, she found Charles Edward in the corridor, leaning against the wall. "Is he all right?" the Lord asked. "He is. Just had a nightmare." "Thank you for taking care of him." "No need to thank me. I'm fond of him. He's a special boy." Charles Edward took a step forward, and suddenly they were very close to each other. The rain beat against the windows. The corridor was dark, lit only by a lantern. "Clara, I need to tell you something." "What?" He hesitated, as if gathering courage. I don't know how to say this without sounding inappropriate, but you've become important to me. Not just because of Peter, but because of you yourself. You brought life back to this house. You brought life back to me." Clara felt her heart race. "Charles, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything now. Just wanted you to know." He was about to step away, but Clara held his hand. "I feel something too. I don't quite know what, but I do. And it frightens me." "Why?" "Because you are the Lord, and I am me. You are Clara, and that is more than enough." They stood there holding hands, until a clap of thunder made them take a step back, breaking the spell. "Good night, Clara." "Good night, Charles." Each went to their room, but neither could sleep. In the following weeks, the tension between them grew. Longer glances, more intimate conversations, accidental touches that lasted longer than they should have. Mrs. Beatrice decided to intervene. She called her son to the library and went straight to the point. "You're fond of her?" Charles Edward sighed. "Mother, I don't know if you're fond of her. There's no point denying it. I see how you look at her, and she looks at you the same way. And what do I do with that? Marry a cook and scandalize the entire society? You do what your heart tells you. Society will talk anyway, Charles. It always does. But in the end, the only thing that matters is whether you will be happy or not. And Peter? Peter loves that young woman. He will be the happiest person in the world if she becomes an official part of the family." Charles Edward ran a hand through his hair, confused. "It's all so complicated." "Only because you want it to be. Love, when it's real, is simple." Those words lingered in his mind for the following days. It was on a Sunday afternoon, during a family lunch, that Charles Edward made the decision he had been contemplating for weeks. The day was clear, with that spring sun streaming through the dining room windows and illuminating the table set with fine china. Everyone was there. He, Peter, Mrs. Beatrice, and Clara, who now ate with them whenever invited. The routine had changed so much in recent months that it no longer seemed strange. Clara was no longer seen as a servant, but as part of the family. Peter spoke animatedly about the history lessons his tutor had given during the week, gesturing with his fork as he chewed. And then the teacher said the pioneers explored everything, but I asked, what about the Native Americans who already lived there? Hadn't they explored it first? Mrs. Beatrice smiled, proud. "Clever question. My grandson. Always question what you're taught." Clara listened attentively, serving more rice on the boy's plate when she saw it was running out. She still maintained those gestures of care, even now that she no longer needed to. Charles Edward observed the scene in silence. He saw his son happy, his mother serene, Clara smiling in that way that lit up the entire room. And he felt he could no longer postpone it. He could no longer pretend that what he felt was merely gratitude. It was much more than that. He slowly set his cutlery aside and cleared his throat. The sound was enough to make everyone stop and look at him. "I have something to say," he began, his voice firm but laced with nervousness. Everyone stopped eating, attentive. Mrs. Beatrice placed her napkin on her lap and leaned back in her chair, waiting. Peter dropped his fork, curious. Clara felt her heart race without knowing why. "Clara?" He looked directly at her, and the weight of that gaze made her tremble. "You arrived here almost a year ago. You came in through the back, as if you didn't belong in this place. But the truth is, from the very first day, you always belonged." Clara opened her mouth to speak, but he raised his hand, asking for silence. "Let me finish, please. This is difficult for me." She nodded, her hands clasped in her lap. "You transformed this house. You transformed my son, who was dying of hunger and sadness. You brought him back to life with patience, with care, with love. And in the process, without even realizing it, you also transformed me." His voice faltered for an instant, and he needed to take a deep breath to continue. "I was dead inside, Clara. Ever since Helen left, I just existed. I fulfilled obligations, signed papers, made decisions, but I didn't live. I had forgotten what it was like to feel joy, what it was like to wake up and want to face the day. And you reminded me. You taught me again." Peter was wide-eyed, his eyes shining. Mrs. Beatrice smiled discreetly, satisfied with the turn of events. "I fell in love with you," Charles Edward said, finally letting the words out. And it wasn't sudden. It was gradual, in every conversation in the kitchen, in every laugh you drew from Peter, in every simple gesture you made without expecting anything in return. I fell in love with your strength, your kindness, the way you transformed pain into care. Clara felt tears streaming down, but she couldn't stop. She couldn't even blink. I know this may seem inappropriate, he continued, his voice trembling now. I know we come from different worlds. You grew up in the village. I grew up amidst titles and obligations. You know struggle, I knew privilege. But none of that matters to me. What matters is that when I'm near you, I feel whole again. I feel alive. He stood up from his chair and walked around the table, stopping beside her. Clara looked up, her face wet with tears, not knowing what to do. Clara Thompson, will you marry me? The silence that followed lasted only seconds, but it seemed like an eternity. Clara covered her face with her hands, sobbing. Charles Edward felt his heart sink, thinking he had ruined everything, that he had been too hasty. Clara, are you crying? Peter asked, getting up from his chair, worried. She shook her head, laughing amidst the tears, trying to wipe her face with her hands. I am, yes, but it's because I'm happy, Peter. I'm so happy. Charles Edward knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. So it's a yes? Clara looked at him, her eyes red but shining in a way he had never seen. I never thought someone like you would look at someone like me. I spent my whole life hearing that my place was in the kitchen, in the back, away from important people. And you asked me to marry you in front of your family, at the dinner table, as if I were worthy of it. You are worthy of it, and of much more. Then yes, she said, her voice choked. I accept. Of course, I accept. Peter screamed with joy, so loud that they probably heard it in the kitchen. He jumped from his chair and ran to hug them both, throwing his arms around Charles Edward and Clara at the same time. You're going to be my real mother now. I mean, you already were, but now it's official. Clara laughed, pulling the boy into a tight hug. I was always yours, Peter, from the first day. Mrs. Beatrice stood up from her chair with dignity, but there were tears in her eyes too. She walked to the three of them and placed her hand on her son's shoulder. Your wife would have approved, she said softly. Helen always wanted you to be happy again, and you deserve this, my son. You deserve to start anew. Charles Edward hugged his mother, then Clara, then his son, and there in that dining room, amidst plates still full of food, the family united in a way that titles and surnames could never unite. That afternoon, they talked about their plans. Clara wanted something simple, discreet. Charles Edward agreed. They didn't need a spectacle. They just needed to celebrate that love that had been born in the most improbable places. We can do it in the estate chapel, Mrs. Beatrice suggested. Small, just family and close friends. And then we'll have a party here, Peter asked, excited, with that cornmeal cake Clara makes. Of course, she replied, ruffling his hair. As many cakes as you want. Preparations began the following week, and that's when the problems appeared. Some families in local society, when they heard about the marriage, began to spread rumors. They said the Lord had gone completely mad, that he was dishonoring the memory of his late wife, that this village woman was a gold digger and only wanted the family's money. The gossip reached Clara's ears through Mary, the housekeeper. Don't pay attention to those gossiping tongues, Mary said, as she helped Clara choose fabric for her dress. People who have nothing to do always find something to talk about in other people's lives. But Clara did care, not because she doubted Charles Edward's love, but because she knew he would have to face judgment, that his name would be dragged through the mud because of her. That night, she sought the Lord in the library. Charles, I need to speak with you. He looked up from the documents he was reviewing. Speak. Are you sure about this? About the marriage? He frowned. Of course I am. Why do you ask? Because people are talking, and I don't want you to lose society's respect because of me. Charles Edward closed the document folder and stood up, walking towards her. Clara, look at me. She obeyed. I don't care what society thinks. I don't care about gossip, about judgment, about any of that. The only thing that matters to me is you and Peter. And if these people can't see how special you are, that's their problem, not ours. But what if it drives away your friends? What if people stop doing business with you? Then they weren't my true friends, and the businesses that matter will continue. Clara, you need to understand something. I spent my whole life doing what was expected of me. I married whom the family approved, inherited lands I didn't ask for, carried a title I never wanted. And it was only when you arrived that I realized life could be different, that I could choose. And I choose you. Clara threw herself into his arms, and the two stood there, embracing, in the middle of that library full of old books and family histories. But now they were writing a new story, their story. The wedding was scheduled for a Saturday morning at the beginning of summer. The estate chapel, small and intimate, was decorated with flowers from the manor's own garden. There was no exaggerated luxury, no ostentation, just simplicity and truth. Clara woke early, nervous. Mrs. Beatrice and Mary helped her get ready in the room that would now be hers and Charles Edward's. The dress was simple, white, with short sleeves and a straight cut, without elaborate lace or complicated embroidery. But when Clara looked at herself in the mirror, she saw that she was beautiful. Not because the dress was expensive or sophisticated, but because the sparkle in her eyes was real. You look beautiful, my dear, Mrs. Beatrice said, adjusting the veil. And I am very proud of you. Thank you for everything, Mrs. Beatrice, for bringing me here, for trusting me. I only saw what was in front of you all along. The rest was all you. In the chapel, Charles Edward waited at the altar, wearing a dark, simple suit, without exaggeration. Peter stood beside his father, holding the rings as if they were the most precious treasure in the world. The guests were few, a few true family friends, household staff who had witnessed everything closely, and some distant cousins who came more out of curiosity than affection, but there were also notable absences. Entire families from local high society declined the invitation, sending empty excuses or simply ignoring it. Charles Edward knew who his true friends were now, and honestly he felt relieved. He preferred 10 people who truly cared to 100 who were there just to judge. When the chapel doors opened and Clara appeared, walking slowly down the central aisle, Charles Edward felt his eyes sting. She was radiant, not because of her clothes or her hairstyle, but because of the way she smiled, the confidence she now carried. Peter nudged his father, whispering loud enough for some guests to hear, "Father, are you crying?" "I am." "Yes, and there's nothing wrong with that." Clara reached the altar, and when the priest began the ceremony, everything around them seemed to disappear. There were only the two of them that moment, those promises they were making to each other. "Charles Edward Montgomery, do you take Clara Thompson as your wife, to love and cherish her, in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," he said, his voice firm. "Clara Thompson, do you take Charles Edward Montgomery as your husband, to love and cherish him in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," she replied, tears flowing freely. Peter handed over the rings, almost dropping one, he was so nervous, and the two laughed. Then came the kiss, and when their lips met, the chapel erupted in applause. The reception was held in the manor's halls, but with a completely different touch than people expected. Instead of classical musicians hired from the capital, there were local musicians with fiddles and banjos playing traditional folk music, the kind that made people clap along and sing. Instead of elaborate banquets with French names, there was a hearty country feast. Slow-cooked beef stew, roasted potatoes, creamed greens, crispy crackling, and homemade sausages, all served in cast-iron pots on long wooden tables. "This wedding is everything I always wanted," one of the cousins commented, filling his plate for the third time. "Real food, good music, truly happy people." Some people, of course, turned up their noses. They found everything vulgar, inappropriate for a family of lords, but most had fun like they hadn't in years. Clara danced with Charles Edward, then with Peter, then with Mrs. Beatrice, and even with some of the household staff who had become friends. She laughed, spun, sang along with the musicians, and no one could stand still watching it. In the late afternoon, as the sun began to set and the party was still lively, Charles Edward pulled Clara to a quieter corner of the garden. "Happy? More than I ever imagined possible," she replied, resting her head on his shoulder. "Sometimes it still feels like a dream. For me too, but it's real. We built this together." They stood there, embracing, watching the guests through the window. Peter was in the center of a circle, dancing with other children and making everyone laugh with his antics. "He's so happy," Clara said. "Thanks to you." "No, thanks to us. You changed too, Charles. You opened up again too." He kissed her forehead, grateful for having had the courage to take a risk, to go against everything expected of him. Years passed like leaves carried by the wind. Life at the manor transformed completely in ways no one could have predicted. Peter grew up strong and healthy, becoming a studious and kind young man, carrying within him his father's steadfastness and his adoptive mother's welcoming heart. He never, not for a second, stopped calling Clara mother. Because family, he learned from a young age, isn't about blood. It's about who stays, who cares, who loves unconditionally. When he was 17, during a dinner, Peter insisted on making a speech. "I know you don't like it when I get emotional," he began, making everyone at the table laugh. "But today I need to say something. Mother Clara, you saved my life, literally. I was dying and you didn't let me. You taught me that it's worth living, that it's worth waking up every day and trying again. And Father, you taught me that we can change, we can open up, we can set pride aside when love is real. You two are my example of everything," Clara cried, as she always cried when Peter said such things. Charles Edward squeezed her hand under the table, moved as well. Peter graduated, studied agricultural science, returned home, and helped modernize the estate. He implemented new techniques, respecting the land, treating the staff with dignity. And when he married, at 25, he chose a simple young woman from the neighboring town, a public school teacher, who had the same kind eyes as Clara. The grandchildren came gradually, 3 in total, and the manor, which had been silent for so long, filled again with children's laughter, with mischief, with life. Mrs. Beatrice lived to be 87, long enough to see her great-grandchildren born, to witness the family she had helped build. On her deathbed, she called Clara and held her hand tightly. "Thank you," the matriarch whispered. "For what, Mrs. Beatrice? For staying, for not giving up, for proving me right." "You were always right," Clara replied, kissing her wrinkled hand. "Always." Mrs. Beatrice died peacefully that night and was buried beside her husband in the family cemetery. And Clara, for the first time since she arrived at the manor, felt that she truly belonged there. Not as an intruder, not as an attachment, but as an inheritor of a story she had helped rewrite. The manor, which had once been a mausoleum of pain and mourning, became a refuge of love and life. The halls that echoed silence now echoed music. The kitchen that prepared, ignored meals was now the heart of the house, always full of people, of conversation, of food, made with affection. And the story of the chicken soup, that simple chicken soup that saved a child, became a legend in the region. Mothers told daughters, grandmothers told granddaughters. They said that when a child wouldn't eat, all it took was to prepare Clara's chicken soup with patience and love, and the miracle would happen. Because there are things that medicine doesn't explain. There are things that science doesn't reach. There are things that only love, genuine care, and constant presence can heal. And that was exactly what Clara brought to the lives of Charles Edward and Peter. It wasn't just food, it was affection. It was the certainty that they were not alone, that someone truly cared, that life could begin again even after the deepest pain. Years and years later, on an autumn afternoon when golden leaves fell through the garden, Charles Edward sat on the veranda, now old. His hair completely white, his body stooped with time. Beside him, Clara, still strong despite her age, knitted a blue blanket for the great-grandchild on the way. "Remember the day you arrived here?" he asked, taking her hand and intertwining their fingers. "How could I forget? I was terrified. I thought I'd last a week. And look where we are now, 50 years later." She stopped knitting and looked at him, her eyes still bright despite the wrinkles. "Every second was worth it, every difficulty, every judgment we faced." "It truly was. We built something beautiful, Clara, something that will continue after us." They sat there in silence, observing the garden that had witnessed so much, the place where Peter played as a child, where the grandchildren learned to walk, where so many stories had been written. A gentle breeze swayed the curtains, bringing the scent of jasmine from the garden. Inside the house, voices could be heard, Peter talking with his wife, the grandchildren arguing about a game, the eldest granddaughter playing the piano in the music room. The manor breathed life. The manor was home. And as the sun set, painting the sky orange, red, and purple, Clara rested her head on Charles's shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for letting me stay, for choosing me when everyone said you were wrong. Thank you for staying, for not giving up when it got difficult." He put his arm around her, and the two sat there embracing, watching the night fall over the mountains. And there, in that instant, in that embrace that carried decades of love, of struggle, of shared construction, everything made sense. All the difficult choices, all the judgments faced, all the tears shed, everything led to that moment of absolute peace. Because in the end, titles don't matter, class differences don't matter, what others think doesn't matter. What matters is finding someone who makes you want to wake up every day, who transforms a house into a home, who teaches you that true love isn't the kind from fairy tales, but the kind built brick by brick, day after day, with patience and dedication. And that's exactly what Clara and Charles Edward did. Together, they built a legacy of love that would span generations. And so ends the story of the chicken soup that healed more than hunger, that warmed more than the body, that united what seemed impossible. If this story touched your heart, if you were moved by the journey of Clara, Charles Edward, and Peter, please like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories we'll bring you, and tell us in the comments what part touched you the most. Was it the marriage proposal? Was it the simple celebration that defied society? Was it the ending with them old on the veranda? Your presence here, your like, your comment, all of it makes all the difference and encourages us to continue bringing stories that make you reflect on what truly matters in life. Until the next story, and may love always conquer the barriers we try to build. A warm embrace, and we'll see you soon.